Hardly any bands embody the genre of power metal quite like Blind Guardian do. From the fantasy lyrics to the speedy solos and riffing, they have come out to be one of the biggest bands in power metal since their start in the mid-1980s. Taking influence from a multitude of genres, from trad and thrash bands such as Iron Maiden and Metallica, to prog bands such as Genesis, Queen, and Gentle Giant. In their 40-year career, they have garnered a loyal audience, and for many, they are the pinnacle of power metal. Blind Guardian started as Lucifer's Heritage in 1984, when singer Hansi Kirsch and guitarist Andre Olbrich got drunk before school and listened to metal together. It was when Hansi sung Merciful Fate songs that Andre was blown away by the range and intensity of his voice.
Hansi started singing King Diamond songs and Merciful Fate stuff and other bands as well. And he was singing so high that I was blown away by his voice. And because he had still this full power, it was not just, it was really a full voice and very high. And I thought, wow, that guy, I should invite for a rehearsal.
Andre then spent weeks trying to convince Hansi to sing, but Hansi wanted to play guitar, which was not possible as the band already had two guitarists. As a compromise, Hansi picked up the bass and agreed to go to a rehearsal where he would also be the singer, which was where Lucifer's Heritage and later on Blind Guardian truly began. Next to join was Thomas Tomen Stauch, who was only 13 years old at the time. He originally took guitar lessons from Andre, which was where he was introduced to the rest of the band, as these lessons were done in the rehearsal room. After he failed to have much talent at the guitar, he asked to have a go on the drums, which is where him and Andre found where his true talent lay.
And then you asked, hey Andre, can I, do you mind if I sit on the drums and try a little bit to play on the drums? And this asshole was sitting behind the drums and started playing a rhythm with hi-hat, bass and snare immediately. Yeah. And then I said, wow, let's quit your guitar lessons because you have absolutely no talent for the guitar, but you are such a talent for the drums. Search a drum teacher and go for the lessons there. Yeah. And you did this, and it was a wise choice, I think.
After much pestering, Hansi and Andre allowed him to join the band despite his young age due to his high level of talent on the drums. Marcus Dork would complete the lineup on rhythm guitar, having been a childhood friend of Andre and joining the band at an early stage. This lineup would release the Symphonies of Doom demo in 1985. This showed the band in a much rawer form than audiences would later know, but also showed their talent early on, with an early version of Wizard's Crown from Battalions of Fear appearing on the demo, but at this time it was known simply as Halloween. This demo also features a more straightforward vocal approach from Hansi, having not quite mastered the growls and intensity in his voice that he would go on to be known for. After this, both Tomen and Marcus Dork would leave, being replaced by Christoph Thiessen on guitar and Hans-Peter Frey on drums. This lineup would go on to release the Battalions of Fear demo in 1986. This shows the band expanding their sound at a fast rate, with the demo including 4 tracks that would go on to appear on the band's debut album. The highlight of the demo is definitely the opening track, Majesty. Even in its raw form, this song still absolutely rips. The songs on this demo rule, even if the versions on the debut album are far superior. But even in their primitive state, songs like Battalions of Fear and Run for the Night show this band expanding their sound in a very short time. In 1987, Tomen would return on drums, as well as Christoph Thiessen being replaced by a longtime guitarist Marcus Seipen, who was asked to jam by Andre, and they found that they had good chemistry. which was also true with the rest of the band.
I think it's very important that we all had the same mindset. As Andre said about Tomen, the same can be said about you.
We were rehearsing every day. You know, we didn't talk about this, but we have to do something. It was just natural, you know, like we rehearsed on whatever Monday and said, okay, see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
And it continued, and I think the only days when we might not have rehearsed was on Sundays when we were too hungover.
This would form the lineup that would be solid for nearly 2 decades. That year, the band signed with No Remorse Records and changed their name from Lucifer's Heritage to Blind Guardian, as the satanic nature of the name made people think they were a black metal band rather than a power or speed metal band. The new name was inspired by the album Awaken the Guardian by prog metal band Fate's Warning, who would play a huge influence on the band and their music. With the band's name and lineup finally put in place, it was time for them to release their fury onto the metal world.
Battalions of Fear, the clutching to scream the American dreams. Battalions of Fear, the way of far to show is the star.
Hard to find a band that broke out of the gate quite as good as Blind Guardian. While the band had not completely found their sound yet, going for a pure speed metal sound, it's an absolutely killer sound that makes this album a joy to listen to from beginning to end. Influenced by their fellow countrymen such as Helloween and Rage, this is an album full of melodic choruses, scorching solos, and it barely ever slows down. The band teamed up with producer Khaled Trapp, who had a huge job on his hands whipping 4 young, hard-partying kids into a tight, hard-working unit. He helped teach Hansi how to sing properly, and got the band to tune their instruments half a step down to achieve a much fuller sound when it came to the full album. All of these things helped the tight and scorching sound found on the album, despite the cheap production, and it feels like the band is raw and hungry. But the most important thing on any album is the songs, and Blind Guardian came with some of the best writing of their career. The opening track, Majesty, is still a constant staple to this day, and one of my favourite songs of theirs. It's 8 minutes long, but it flies by, with the solos being absolutely incredible, and the lyrics already showing off this band's affinity for the works of Tolkien. But the album does not ride or die on its first song, as the rest of the album does not slouch one bit. Guardian of the Blind is a killer song based on the work of Stephen King, more specifically the Book of It, another favourite by this band, and Wizard's Crown has a chorus that will never leave your head, it's so catchy. Side 2 opens with Run for the Night, one of this band's most underrated songs. The chorus is absolutely incredible with some killer guitar work, and the rest of the song hardly slouches. This album ends strong too, with the Martyr having some of the best drumming and guitar work on the entire album, but the final full song, the title track, is where it's all at. One of the only times this band will get political, this song is very anti-Reagan, which makes it very based. It captures a feeling of being in the middle of such a scary time in history, and you can feel the band's anger almost seeping out of the music. Battalions of Fear is an absolutely excellent introduction to this band. While their sound is not fully formed yet, it's hard to argue against the absolutely stacked list of tracks on this album. But with that, the band had to quickly get back to the studio to record the follow-up. But how will they top an album as good as this? After a small tour, the band were quickly called back to the studio to record the follow-up to Battalions. This time, the band wanted to have more of a punch to their sound, being especially inspired from seeing Testament at the Dynamo Festival, as well as listening to more Bay Area thrash bands such as Forbidden. The band also wanted to expand their sound with longer songs and more progressive writing, with Fate's Warning continuing to play a huge influence on them. The short time between the recording of the two albums was hard for the band, as for the first time they were having to write a full album a lot quicker than they were used to, as the demos and the debut album didn't have as much of a time crunch on them. This, as well as the fact that the band still did not have the discipline, spending a lot of the opening months playing cards rather than writing new songs. Also, the band still had jobs to tend to, and Marcus especially had trouble with school. He had already gotten in trouble for skipping school to record the debut, with his mum having to write him a sick note to let him have time off. This led to them only having a couple songs written by the time they actually got into the studio. When they got to the studio, Kalle was not a fan of the new sound found on the songs, but the band stood by them, saying they would sound better when they were fully recorded. He also helped the band improve, teaching Tommen how to play to a click track and adding in more choirs to the overall mix for this album. However, the rushed nature of this album led to the band having a negative view of it over time, feeling that if they had more time, then the album could have been a lot better, with Marcus especially wishing he had more takes to get his solos down perfectly.
We would have needed maybe another month and the album would have been even better.
Make it 6.
But
we would have played more parts.
Even the biggest song on this album, Valhalla, was a rushed entry with the band wanting to scrap it, only including it because they had a lack of songs for the album. It's a good thing they did, as Valhalla is an excellent song, with great support from Kai Hansen, who had recently left his band Halloween. The chorus for Valhalla is also one of the catchiest in metal, with it being common for crowds to continue to sing it for several minutes after it's supposed to at live shows. The rest of the songs hardly slouch either, with the more fast sound leading to a very aggressive album. Damn for All Time is absolutely pummeling, while Follow the Blind is a more crushing, doom-laden track. My favourite on this album, however, is the opener, Banished from Sanctuary, as it starts the album on a ruthless and cutthroat note. The story of John the Baptist has never sounded so good. Overall, despite the band often saying that this is their weakest album, I tend to disagree. While it shows the band taking more of a sidestep than a leap forward with their sound, the songs on this are absolutely killer, and the thrashier sound still fits this young and hungry band. However, If this album made you thought that this band would stay the same, the next album was sure to prove absolutely everybody wrong. After the release of Follow the Blind, the band quickly returned to the studio to record their most experimental album yet. The band reinvested almost all the money they had made from Follow the Blind back into the production of Tales from the Twilight World. This money allowed them to buy a 16-track recorder for songwriting, which the band spent time building themselves. This new recorder allowed the band to expand their songwriting, as it let them try things out such as choirs and guitar overdubs before going to the studio, seeing how it would fit in songs as they were writing them. They were once again called into the studio before they wanted to, as they hadn't finished all the songwriting. But, by a stroke of luck, Kale was working overtime with the production, which allowed the band to finish their songwriting while they were staying at the studio for about 3 to 4 weeks before Kale was able to start with the production of the new album. These recordings went much more smoothly than the Follow the Blind sessions. This was not only due to the fact that the band had more time to develop the songs beforehand, but also the band having much more discipline. This allowed the band to work a lot harder and faster on the new songs. Tommen worked especially hard, considering when he finished the drum tracks he had to leave the studio quickly to go to get a surgery for his lung. Overall, Tales has a much more expansive sound than the 2 albums before it, with the band becoming more firmly sat in a power metal sound. This sound is perfectly captured on the opening song, Traveller in Time, which shows the band taking a much more dramatic style to music and songwriting. This sound continues on other classic songs, such as Goodbye My Friend with its amazing trailing vocals, and Welcome to Dying absolutely rips, with Andre laying down one of his best solos. This album also showed the band starting a tradition of having a more folky acoustic song on the album, with this one being the beautiful Lord of the Rings. It shows how the band are confident in their new direction, going for a fully acoustic song with an excellent refrain which ends the song in a memorable and awesome way. This album is not without its more thrashy songs, however. Tommyknockers once again goes back to the stories of Stephen King, being pummeling with crushing riffs. Kai Hansen also returns for guest vocal on the pseudo title track Lost in the Twilight Hall, with him and Hansi trading vocals for parts of the song. However, my absolute favourite song from this album has to be the closing track, The Last Candle. While it took a while for it to really click with me, it arguably features my favourite vocal performance Hansi would ever do. This track perfectly sums up this era of the band, with the choirs and added guitar layering making the song feel massive and grandiose. The guitar solo is also absolutely incredible, with the drum work also being top notch. The chorus is easily one of the best this band would ever write, with the backing vocals aiding it to make one of the greatest power metal songs ever written. Tales from the Twilight World shows the band sitting more comfortably into the sound they would later be known for. While the album did not make much buzz at the time, it has gone on to be more widely considered as one of the best albums in the genre as years have gone by. The band would show that this was not a fluke, as their next album would not only be their most expansive album yet, but also my personal favourite of their entire career. After the release of Tales from the Twilight World, No Remorse Records, the label that had signed the band from the start, went bankrupt. This led the band to sign on to Virgin Records, as No Remorse Records had a distribution deal with them. This meant that for the first time, the band were on a major label. The band were happy with this change, as they were becoming increasingly dissatisfied with No Remorse Records.
Very lucky in an unlucky situation. For us it was almost... We were unsatisfied with No Remorse before, because we had already the feeling that the Tales had much more potential, and he couldn't really make use of it because he was not focused anymore.
For Somewhere Far Beyond, the band had a much longer time in the studio, with them spending 3 months recording the album. These sessions were not smooth, however, with the band often clashing with producer Kale Trapp. While the band wanted to become more adventurous with their songwriting, Trapp was more rigid with his recording form. This led to many arguments, like when the band wanted to change the tempo for the click track of the middle part of the Bard song, while Trapp did not want to, which led to the song not coming out how the band originally wanted to. Also, during the recording of the title track, a heated argument was had over the ending, where the band wanted both vocals and a lead guitar to close the song. Kale was adamant that this was not a good idea, which led to him storming out until the band could come to a decision of what to do. These arguments and fights show how the relationship between the band and Trapp had become more strained than the beginning, with Trapp not evolving musically in the same way that the band constantly was. Overall, the songs on Somewhere Far Beyond feature even more experimentation and evolution than on previous albums. Songs like Ashes to Ashes and especially Theatre of Pain present the band going for much more of a classical sound that sound nothing like the band did on any album before. That's not to say these songs are bad by any means, with Theatre of Pain having one of the best choruses on the entire album. That's not to say this album is nothing like it come before, however, with the opening song, Time What Is Time, having crushing vocal lines and a great anthemic chorus. The song is based on the Blade Runner film, showing the band having more film references as long as they're ones based on books. Kai Hansen also returns for his last guest appearance on the Blind Guardian album, playing the fantastic solo on The Quest for Tanalorn. However, it's the second half of this album where it really shines. The Bard song In the Forest is probably the most famous song from this album, being a natural follow-up to Lord of the Rings from the last album. This song was based on The Bard's Tale game, which Andre and Marcus played a lot. The band pushed for this to become a single, but the label didn't see potential in a metal band releasing such a light song as a single, so it never got released. It is famous for not only becoming the unofficial name for the band's fanbase, but also for its live performances, where the crowd will sing almost all of the song. often overlooked is the second part of the song, which has a much heavier feel and one of the group's most infectious melodies in it. It's a shame this song is not played anywhere near as much as the first part, as I think it's just as good as the first part. However, this album's crowning jewel is its final song and its title track. This song shares a lot of similarities with the last song on the album before, The Last Candle, being a grand and bombastic end to the album. The guitars are on fire, the drums and bass are giving this song an absolutely incredible low end, and Halsey puts in one of the best vocal performances he has ever done. The hard work the band put into the album paid off extremely well, as the album was met with huge acclaim from both fans and critics. It was also the most successful this band had ever been up until now, with many European countries finally taking notice of this great band. However, the biggest success for this album was in Japan, where it reached all the way to number 1. This caused the band to have their first ever international tour, where they flew to Japan to tour in December of 1992. The tour got off to a shaky start, with Andre not having his passport to fly, instead only having an ID. He very nearly did not make it to Japan, but he went to the embassy and was adamant to receive a passport, which he was able to in just one day. Also, the band found their hard partying would not be allowed anywhere near as much in Japan as it was in Europe. This first hit them when they got to a train station by only 15 minutes late and completely missed their train, which led to them being late to a show. This made them learn their lesson, however, with them becoming far more accustomed to the rigid touring structure in Japan. Japan were happy with the tour, as they were taken care of by the people of Japan, who were hard-working and helped their crew get a lot of their amps up and down, as well as taking care of the band. This tour would result in the band releasing their first ever live album, Tokyo Tales, in March of 1993. This is a killer live album, showing how ruthless and cutthroat the band were live during this era. In my opinion, a lot of these songs have the definitive versions on these albums, such as Welcome to Dying. This would also be the band's final album to be produced by Kale Trapp, which was probably a good thing, as their next album will be their most experimental album yet. When it came to the recording of Imaginations from the Other Side, the band found themselves in high spirits. This was because of the success of the Somewhere Far Beyond album and its subsequent tour. The band recorded their demos in Shelter Studios and had a lot of ideas for the new album. A lot of them never made it past the demo phase. This includes parts of Script for My Requiem, which the band heavily edited during this time before it made the final cut. Also, it is said around 50% of the song and the story ends was originally meant to be on the title track. The biggest change for this album was the band finally parted ways with longtime producer Kale Trapp, as they were not satisfied with the work on Tokyo Tales and by extension Somewhere Far Beyond. This was due to Kale's strict and old-fashioned production style, which often clashed with the young band's urge to experiment and evolve. The band went to London to look around studios and met new producer Flemming Rasmussen. He had previously worked on albums for Rainbow, Metallica and Morbid Angel. The band chose to record in Sweet Silence Studios in Denmark, famously where Metallica recorded Master of Puppets. The band found the change of producers a hard one, as Rasmussen was a lot stricter on them and made them play tighter and harder, which took the bands a couple days to get used to. This was not the only issue with the production, as the band had to pause recordings for about 6 weeks as Andre had issues with a nerve in his hand. This left him unable to play, and if it was left for a couple more days, he may have lost all movement in his hand forever. Also, while recording part of the chorus section for Mordred's song, it was lost due to a technical issue with their tape machine, but they were able to recover and fix it due to having it backed up on digital files, which were quite new at the time. Overall, the band went for a heavier sound on this album, with Hansi going for a much grittier vocal style than on previous albums. This can be heard most clearly on the thrashy I'm Alive, with Hansi putting one of his most intense vocal performances ever. The band continued the tradition of having a folky acoustic song on every album, with this one being the excellent A Past and Future Secret. This also shows the band going into a much more progressive direction with their songwriting, bringing songs like A Script for My Requiem and Born in a Morning Hall having a much more intricate compositions that had not been found on earlier albums. The proggiest song on this album has to be the closer, And the Story Ends, which continues a separate tradition of the band ending their albums with a bombastic and complex closer, being one of their best. My favourite song on the album, and probably my favourite song by the band overall, is Bright Eyes. This mixes in all of the things the band have been trying to achieve in the recording of this album. It has a complex arrangement, amazing harmonies, but it's so catchy with the new hook what feels like every 10 seconds and one of Hansi's best performances that really show why he's one of my favourite singers in the entirety of metal.
Leave me alone, isolation, there's hope. There's something else waiting, a promise that's done. Freezing me at the restless and low. These days full of sadness and joyfully change and defeat.
This album continued the success the band had achieved with its previous album, achieving even more commercial and critical acclaim. It is now often regarded one of the greatest power metal albums of all time, being ranked by both Loudwire and Metal Hammer in their top 5 in the entire genre. The band would tour with Nevermore, where they found themselves suddenly with a much bigger crew and stage setup, due to how much bigger they had become in only a few years. This made the band take touring a lot more seriously than they had done in the past, throwing away a lot of their hard partying ways they had done in Europe and Japan. Also, in 1996, Hansi appeared on the album Land of the Free by Gamma Ray, finally paying back Kai Hansen for the 3 times he had played on Blind Guardian albums. During the recordings for Imaginations, the band also recorded a cover of the Chordettes classic Mr. Sandman. The label surprisingly thought that this could have success for a single, so got the band to film a video for it. In this video, the band dressed up in drag and looked absolutely fabulous while doing so, while a clown torments a child. The video is just as weird as the cover is in concept. These would appear on the Forgotten Tales compilation, which featured reworked tracks and covers. A lot of the covers are amazing on here, with great covers of To France by Mike Oldfield and The Wizard by Uriah Heep.
Why don't we listen to the voices in our heart? 'Cause all I know we're fine, we're not so far apart.
This album is also notable for having the definitive versions of some songs, with this version of Lord of the Rings being widely considered the best by many fans. Also, the acoustic version of Bright Eyes features a completely different arrangement, and I happen to absolutely adore it.
Leave me alone, isolation, there's hope. There's something else waiting, a promised destiny. Breathing me, I'll be restless and low. These days full of sadness have joyfully changed into fear.
Overall, while it is a throwaway release, this is still well worth a listen, even if it is a bit non-essential. It is definitely worth it if you listen to the 2007 reissue with their covers of Don't Talk to Strangers and Beyond the Realms of Death. Their cover of Realms is as good as the Priest one, and I will die on that hill. After this, the band would reconvene into the studio to record their first ever concept album, and the album that would become the band's definitive statement to the world. When the band reconvened to the studio in July of 1997, they wanted to do something that is the height of artistic ambition. They wanted to do their first ever concept album. The band had many ideas for this album, such as the legends of King Arthur, as well as the story of Rheingold. However, after a long time deciding, they ended up landing on the story of the Silmarillion. This was due to the band having a higher affinity for the works of Tolkien, as well as the story being much easier than Rheingold to properly condense into an album. The band found it tough when working on a concept album for the first time, especially with the sequencing of it. This was because for the first time they had to put songs in a certain order. The main song with this issue was Noldor, which was meant to be track 3, but it didn't quite work as an early part of the album, so it was reworked to take place later in the story. Flemming Rasmussen returned on production duties for this album, and overall, they went smoothly for the band. This was mainly due to the band having much longer turnover time for this album, letting them not feel as rushed as they had on previous albums. However, they have said that they were under a lot of pressure after the success of Somewhere and Imaginations, as they wanted to keep up the high quality and also high sales. During these sessions, Hansi stepped down from bass to focus entirely on the songwriting and vocals for the album. To replace him, the band got Oliver Holsworth to fill in as their session and live bassist, and he would stay in the band until 2011. Also, during the production of this album, the band met engineer and mixer Charlie Ballfiend, who would go on to help produce the band's later albums. During the promotion for this album, the label made the band take photos wearing medieval robes, which the band were not happy about in the slightest, as they never liked to dress up, thinking it made them look more like a gimmick band than a proper band. You can even see how grumpy they are by looking at the photos, especially poor old Hansi. However, when this album was released, this showed all the issues in the production studio and the silly clothes would all be worth it. As right from the opener, Into the Storm, this album shows it's going to be no fluke from this band's incredible run of albums so far. The following track, Nightfall, was actually a song that was originally written with the Rheingold concept in mind. It is a live staple and has one of the most powerful vocal performances ever. If the chorus doesn't get stuck in your head for months after you've heard it, then you just aren't human. Overall, this album continues the trend of the band getting more progressive and anthemic as the albums went on. This sound can be heard on songs like Blood Tears, A Dark Passage, Thorn, and especially the incredible centerpiece of the entire album, Noldor, Dead Winter Rains. Choirs on this song give it such an epic feel, and you can almost feel the emotion of the song pouring out whenever it's on. Not to say this album is without its fast moments, however. The Curse of Fëanor has one of my favourite Blind Guardian choruses, and some ripping verses, with incredible use of backing vocals which this band have perfected at this point. Also, the most speed metal song has to be When Sorrow Sang Softly. It goes with such an incredible speed, with great vocal performances, and Tommen hitting the skins like nobody's business. Easily the best chorus on this album, however, has to be on Time Stands Still at the Iron Hill. The entire song is incredible, but the chorus is just something else. Hansi has often claimed this is his favourite Blind Guardian song, and it's pretty easy to see why. This album also features one of the band's biggest hits, and the only single from the album, Mirror Mirror. Continuing on the trend of infectious choruses, Mirror Mirror has one of the best, with it being constantly in my head. However, it's not a one-trick pony, as the verses are killer, backing vocals giving it the grandiosity that a song like this deserves, and one of Andre's best solos in his entire career. It's clear to see why this is a concert staple, and arguably the band's most famous song. While I have done nothing but praise the album so far, and I do adore it, there is one glaring flaw with it, and that is the amount of intermissions and interludes on it. While I get the need for them for this sort of album, and bands like Queensryche have used them to perfection on albums like Operation Mindcrime, here there are too many and they are pretty much meaningless. They take up overall about 7 minutes but feel a lot longer, as the album is often halted for no real reason. They really hurt the overall pacing of this album, and I normally listen to the album, skipping them entirely. Overall, however, this band ended the century on a high note, as this album went on to be their most famous and well-loved album. Often considered the greatest power metal album of all time, it gave the band even more exposure around the world. It was the first of their albums to be released in the United States, allowing them to have an even bigger reach with their music. In just 10 years, this band have released 6 near-perfect albums. This is one of my favourite album runs in history, and the evolution from the basic speed metal of Battalions, to the start of their experimentation on Somewhere Far Beyond, to their magnum opus in Nightfall, this band really knew how to put their name on the map of metal history. But would the band be able to keep up the momentum going into the new century? Or will cracks start to form and cause this band to start tumbling down?